Toby Cooper, and I was Jack's partner. So we got up in the morning. I got up first as always. Jack came into my office a little later, gave me a kiss, said he was going, told me he loved me, and I did him, and then he left to go to college. The weather was particularly bad that morning, and I saw on Twitter there'd been an accident in the city centre, and I said, unknowingly, that's going to cause a lot of problems in town today and all the rest of it. About 5 minutes later, the police came through the door with a big file, and the first thing I saw was Jack's bank card stuck to the top of the file. And that's when they told me that he'd been hit by the truck.
My name's Julie Gorton. I'm the Live Donor Coordinator here at Salford Royal Foundation Trust, and I'm also the lead nurse for the Renal Young Adult Clinic. The treatment for renal patients, once they're diagnosed, is haemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis or a transplant. The ideal world is that we would like every patient to have a transplant, but unfortunately not enough donors about. So we look at live donors as well, so the transplant is the best option for these patients to lead a good quality of life.
Since I had the second transplant, it's been immense. I mean, that was October 2003. We're now in August 2015. And I've done so much. When I had the second transplant, my kids were 1 and 3. Never really knew me on dialysis as such. So ever since, we've had obviously lots of family holidays. I've seen them grow up, go from preschool to primary school to high school. Now my daughter's finishing A-levels, son's doing his GCSEs next year. We've been to Florida and Australia. I've changed jobs, moved up in careers, started my own business. There's been so much gone on, and with freedom, without having to think, well, every other day I've got to reserve 5, 6, 7 hours of my life for dialysis. But there's so much that maybe I couldn't have done in the same way without the chance of a transplant.
Renal patients are with us from the day of diagnosis, basically till the day of death. And that includes, once they've been transplanted, they still remain under our care, and they will remain under our care long term, so they will come to the renal clinics. So even after a transplant, they could come to clinic every 6 months, but they're still under the care of the renal team. So it's a long-term treatment.
I do know Julie Gorton. I've known Julie since 1987. She was a staff nurse when I got a call from the first transplant at MRI, and she was responsible for doing my bloods to make sure I got that transplant that night.
My name is Dr. Chris Booth. I'm an intensive care consultant at Salford Royal, and I'm also the clinical lead for organ donation for the Trust. So the Glasgow Coma score is an assessment of conscious level that we use for anybody whose conscious level is less than normal in hospital. It's based on 3 separate clinical assessments. The response of your eyes, so whether you open your eyes when we ask a question, and whether we have to inflict a bit of discomfort to get you to open your eyes, or whether you don't at all. It's the second part of it is what you're saying or what you're not saying, which is obviously worse. So you can either be completely coherent, or you can be very confused, or you can be saying nothing. And the final component is what you do when we ask you to do something, what movements you make. So we might ask you to squeeze our fingers. The process starts with the family. So before we can proceed any further, we need to get consent from the family members for donation to proceed. Now, when we're taking consent, we consider what the patient would want rather than what the family want. So we check the organ donor register, and if someone's on the organ donor register, we consider that an indication that they'd like to be a donor. There's then a series of processes that the specialist nurses will go through. So the first thing they'll do is they'll perform a medical assessment on the patient. So they'll look through all the patient's past medical history, looking for any diseases which might mean that they can't become a donor. And then they try and match to see whether or not there's a recipient where the organs could go to. Alongside that, there's also a series of blood tests that these specialist nurses take, and they're looking for conditions or diseases which will prevent donation occurring. And they also allow better matching of the organs from the donor to a potential recipient from somewhere else, because they've obviously got to be compatible. Once the transplant centres have found a patient that could receive the organ, that we then have to move towards retrieving those organs from the patient. Now, in the UK now, we have specialist retrieval teams who come to the hospital, and the patient will go to the operating theatre where those organs will be retrieved from the patient for donation, and they'll go off to the recipient centres across the country.
I waited for the second kidney transplant probably about 14 years. So the first kidney lasted just 2 years. So in that 14-year period I went back on dialysis, and in all that time probably got a call for a new transplant, or potentially the equivalent of say 1 a year, so I was quite fortunate in that respect. So in the interim I was back on dialysis doing, originally I started on 8 hours 3 times a week, but at the time of the long waiting period for my second transplant, probably about 4 hours. In the end I was needing more time, so it started to be 5 or 6 hours each session, so it's 3 times a week, every other day.
The biggest problem that we have in the UK with donation is actually consent from families to become a donor. So even in the situation where a patient signed the organ donor register, the family can still override that wish of the patient. So the family can still say no, even if they know the patient has said previously they'd like to be a donor. Now, I think that highlights a really important point, which is that we've got to get people signing the register, but we've also got to get people talking to their families to tell them their wishes as well, so that when they're in that situation and they can't express their own wishes, the family can advocate for them and tell us, as the doctor looking after them, what they would want in that situation. Across the country, it's recognised that the consent rate for donation is one of the key parts of improving our donor rates, and we currently sit around 60–70% consent rates across the UK, and that really needs to be higher if we're going to make any further difference to the number of donors across the UK.
At this point, once he come out of surgery, Jack was in an induced coma at that point. The doctors, the surgeon, the neurosurgeon, everything, took me into a room and said that basically the next 24 hours were critical. And at that point they were only giving him a 30% chance of survival at that point. By the time we got to Thursday morning, it was pretty clear at that point that Jack wasn't going to survive. We were going to donate, and what Jack wanted to donate. We took the decision, and I took the decision with his family, that we were going to donate everything but his eyes, which was a personal thing. And they pronounced Jack dead at 7:27 on the Thursday evening. You're coming to terms with the fact that you've lost your loved one, but you've also got to make some decisions very, very quickly. And those decisions, you know, are the ones that make sure that the organs are fit for donation. So initially it's very, very hard. But because we all knew, and I knew, that Jack wanted to be a donor, then it made it easier. And then about 10 days after Jack had died and we'd donated his organs, I got a letter off the donation service, which it gives you a brief description of the people that had received Jack's organs. So when you sat reading that, and there's 2 teenagers on there that have received Jack's organs. There's a woman, a young woman married with a couple of kids who's now going to live a long life with her children. When you read all of those stories, that's the bit that makes a difference. So I took the decision to put that letter on Facebook and Twitter, so that hopefully Jack's friends would get the same comfort from it that I did. And the response was immediate, and it was message after message after message of people that were signing up, and it's in the hundreds now. Since Jack died and Jack's organs were donated, it's something that I'm pushing for everybody to do, because I've seen how important it is now. If you're not on the register, sign it. Just don't think about it, just sign it. Because it gives the opportunity for you to save somebody else's life if anything happens to you. It helps your family and your loved ones with the loss. It helps them deal with the loss. It gives your family and your loved ones that sense that there's part of you living on. And you know, if there's one last good thing that you can do is help save somebody else's life, then you need to sign the register. But once you've signed it, they know that you're a donor, and you will save somebody's life. It's as simple as that. You will save somebody's life.